Spare the Kids, Why Whooping Children Won't Save Black America. Written by Stacey Patton. Chapter 2. I Love Whupping. Reflections on the Adrian Peterson and Baltimore mom controversies. Whupping. We do that all the time. Back in September 2015, the ever-outspoken NBA Hall of Famer Charles Barkley made this statement during a debate with Jim Rome on CBS sports show, The NFL Today. Barkley, who's often celebrated for defying political correctness and speaking without fear, appeared on the show in the wake of the Adrian Peterson's arrest and indictment for child abuse. The 6'1", 217-pound star running back for the Minnesota Vikings had punished his 4-year-old son after the child pushed one of his siblings. Peterson sought to teach him about violence by stuffing leaves in his mouth and repeatedly hitting his bare skin with a switch from a tree. Hospital photographs showed lacerations covering the boy's legs. A police report said he also sustained defense wounds on his hands and cuts and bruises on his back, buttocks, legs, ankles, and scrotum. Got him in the nuts once, I noticed, but I felt so bad, and I'm all for tearing that butt up when needed, Peterson said in a text to the boy's mother. In a follow-up text, he wrote, "Never do I go overboard, but all my kids will know, hey, daddy has the biggest heart, but he don't play no games when it comes to acting right." Peterson's attorney, Rusty Hardin, said his client was not a child abuser. Adrian is a loving father who used his judgment as a parent to discipline his son. He used the same kind of discipline with his child that he experienced as a child growing up in Texas. It's important to remember that Adrian never intended to harm his son and deeply regrets the unintentional injury. During the CBS segment, when Rome asked if it was ever appropriate to hit a child, Barkley responded by saying that it's culturally acceptable practice in Black communities. When Rome pushed back by calling Peterson's parenting abusive, Barkley cautioned against telling parents living in different environments how to discipline their children. He then suggested that if whooping children became illegal, every Black parent in my neighborhood in the South would be in trouble or in jail under those circumstances. Let's be real. Barkley is right. His comments represent a routine understanding of how to discipline children inside the Black community. He simply articulated what the overwhelming majority of Black Americans believe when it comes to disciplining children. This belief isn't grounded in research or widespread discussions of best practices, but rather in the purported benefits in their own lives. So many people defend whooping kids by citing their own scars as beneficial and positively transformative, believing, quote, "I was whooped and I turned out fine." Barkley cited his own physical injuries sustained during his grandmother's whoopings and shrugged them off as a typical experience for Black children. "I got beat with switches. I've had many welts on my legs and lacerations," he told a visibly disturbed Rome. Barkley's matter-of-fact comment reveals that getting cut and bruised during a whooping is so common that many Black people don't even recognize that these types of injuries as evidence of abuse. When Rome argued that the open wounds and bruises on Peterson's son constituted a beating, Barkley suggested that Peterson may have gone overboard, but then he took issue with the semantics. "I don't like the term beat. We call it spanking, or whooping our kids," Barkley said. Beat, break, spank, pop, wear that ass out, tear that butt up, whoop. Changing the word or the spelling is often a defense maneuver that tries to downplay the level of violence. Not to mention there's no consensus among Black people about the meaning of each one of those terms, nor is there an agreed upon working definition of what constitutes abuse. In my travels across the country, doing child advocacy work, I've talked to folks who've told me that their parents whipped them with switches, belts, and extension cords, but they didn't feel that those punishments were abusive. If we put 10 people in a room and asked them what it means to beat versus spank or whoop a child, we would not get a consensus. Most times, what people choose to call physical discipline is representative of the cultural or regional vernacular they grew up in. For example, my adopted mother never said she was going to spank me because she thought that was a soft approach that white folks use on their kids. The threatening language she used, from "I'll slap the black off you" to "I'll knock your head off," often bordered on the homicidal. While folks split hairs over terminology, what binds them together is that each euphemism is about hitting a child. Each involves pain. and each poses the risk of seriously injuring or killing a child in a moment of anger. Added to these varying cultural and generational definitions, even the law doesn't reflect consensus. The legal line distinguishing physical discipline from child abuse varies widely from state to state, with no clear across-the-board definition. According to the American Bar Association Center on Children and the Law in Washington, D.C., some states allow spanking, paddling, switching, if administered in a reasonable manner, while others, such as Texas, allow reasonable physical force, when on the extent believed necessary to maintain discipline. Other states don't specifically prohibit corporal punishment, even when it results in a serious injury to the child, as long as the deadly force was not utilized. But how do you determine whether a child is acceptably bruised or not? Who gets to define reasonable? Leaving it to angry and frustrated parents caught up in the heat of the moment results in parents such as Adrian Peterson being arrested, or worse, children being killed. The day after his CBS interview with Jim Rome, Charles Barkley appeared on the Dan Patrick radio show and didn't back down from his stance. He also admitted to punishing his daughter, who is now an adult. "I hope I never crossed the line. She was spanked pretty good a few times, and she probably deserved it," Barkley said. Reflecting on his own childhood whoopings again, he said, "I'm pretty sure my grandmother, who was the greatest woman ever lived, may have crossed the line at times, but you know what? I feel pretty good about the person that I am today." This kind of celebration of our elders whooping us is too often viewed as a sign that the wounds have healed, that the scars have calloused, and that the pain has resulted in strength and good character that we might not have developed without the violence. Barkley wasn't alone in his sympathy for Peterson and defense and celebration of whooping kids. On a different segment, the retired NFL running back Ricky Williams was often cited as an example of what is wrong with today's professional athletes. Williams said his mother beat him and he turned out fine. "If such discipline were considered illegal," Williams said, "my mom would be under the prison." Rome noted that Peterson hit his son in the testicles and asked Williams, "You don't have a problem with that?" "I don't," Williams replied. Meanwhile, Detroit Lions running back Reggie Bush appeared on the Boomer and Carton show on WFAN in New York and said he had been punished the same way that Peterson whipped his son. "I know a lot of my friends and a lot of guys I played with, they were punished the same way too. I got what we call whoopings." Bush went further by saying that he planned to discipline his infant daughter similarly. "I definitely will try to, will obviously not leave bruises or anything like that on her, but I definitely will discipline her harshly depending on what the situation is." After his comment drew outrage, Bush said he misspoke about using a switch on his daughter. "Spanking is different than a branch or a stick," he said. "I believe in spanking a child if needed, not beating them." A chorus of black male athletes also used Twitter to voice their support for Peterson and to reflect on how whooping had made them better people. Utah Jazz power forward Trevor Brooker recalled having to pick his own switch. New Orleans Saints running back Mark Ingram Jr. and Arizona Cardinals defensive end Daryl Dockett implied that love validated the countless whoopings that they received. Phoenix Suns forward Anthony Tolliver credited being beaten with switches and belts with saving his life. A few people used their platforms to speak out against what Peterson did and the broader culture of accepted abuse. Most notable was Chris Carter, a Hall of Fame football receiver and sports analyst who spoke emotionally about his own upbringing during an appearance on ESPN's NFL Sunday Countdown. He recalled how his single mom raised 7 children by herself and used physical discipline as a parenting tool. "My mom did the best she could do, but there are thousands of things I learned since then that my mom was wrong. This is the 21st century, and my mom was wrong. And I promise my kids I won't teach them that mess to them. You can't beat a kid to make them do what you want them to do." But for the most part, the comments by Barkley and many other black athletes hit home for millions of Americans. And that's because the majority of black parents in America, not just in the South, view hitting children as synonymous with good, responsible parenting. Researchers have consistently found that more black parents spank their children than those of other ethnic groups. For example, in 2014, The Maryland-based nonprofit research organization Child Trends found that 81% of Black women, as opposed to 62% of Latino women and white women, agreed that a child sometimes needs a good hard spanking. Asian women were the least likely to agree. The research also found no significant difference for men along racial lines. And while many people assume that poor and educated single Black moms are more likely to agree with spanking, a survey conducted by Child Trends for more than 3 decades found that a greater percentage of Black women who are childless, married, and have attended college agree that children need to be physically punished. Sadly, hitting children who can't protect themselves has become part of our cultural DNA and identity. For many Black parents, not spanking is viewed as selling out or acting white. We mock parents who use timeouts, who take away phones and iPads as punishment, and who employ verbal reasoning with children. We scoff at their privilege and how nice it must be to have the luxury to ignore the misdoings of your children in public spaces. Only those with privilege have the time to read parenting blogs and books about positive discipline. Only those who don't have to worry about being seen as another bad Black parent can think that no TV time for little Connor or Becky will lead them to knowing how to act right in the world. This kind of racialized mockery has become part of how we rationalize hurting Black children's bodies. The embrace of whoopings isn't only about affirming our Blackness, like celebrating Kwanzaa and knowing the words to the Black national anthem. The decision whether to physically discipline our children is seen as one of life or death. Embracing alternative parenting styles is viewed as risky, one that might lead to unruly children who don't know how to act, or worse, invite the violence of American racism. Meanwhile, as increasing numbers of white folks continue to explore nonviolent methods of child rearing, Black folks have convinced ourselves that we must whoop our children because if we don't, then the police will beat them, lock them up, or kill them. Well, how's that parenting strategy working for us? Not well. Just look at the weekly murders of Black children across this country and the epidemic of locking up our adolescent kids. If whooping our children kept them from being killed by the police, then why are activists in the streets protesting police brutality? If whooping our children has been so successful at keeping Black people out of prisons, then why are we having a national conversation over mass incarceration? Black parents are taught and teach one another that the only way to protect kids from the violence of white racism is to mimic the methods and logic of society. But they become vilified and punished for doing that as well. And as Black parents perpetuate this culture of physical discipline against their children, white America argues that violence, including whipping children, is exceptional and unique to Blackness, even though white people taught us to whoop and break the will of our children during slavery. Part of this logic also embraces racist beliefs that we are inherently criminal, that we are destined to be menaces to society, that the only way to break the cycle of crime and poverty in our communities is to beat it out of our children. We keep whooping our children. Yet the U.S. Department of Education has reported that half of all preschoolers suspended more than once are Black. We keep whipping our children, even as students of color face harsher punishments in school than their white peers, even though they're less likely to engage in bad behavior. This leads to a higher number of youth of color being incarcerated. We continue to use a negative to prevent future negatives. Our fear that saying no to whooping kids will lead us to a lifetime of crime and pathology is without any basis, none whatsoever. We keep telling ourselves that whooping our children will protect them, even though research at Villanova University in 2013 found that darker-skinned Black students were more likely to be suspended than Black students with light skin. We keep whooping our children, even though researchers have found no evidence that they are more likely to misbehave than other groups of children, even though they are suspended and expelled at higher rates. We keep whooping our children, even as they remain overrepresented in the nation's foster care system, which has become a feeder for the juvenile justice and adult prison systems. In some states, such as California and Illinois, Up to 80% of adult prisons have had contact with the foster system as a result of child abuse. And in Connecticut, 70% of juveniles in confinement have histories with foster care. We keep whooping our children, even though, according to data from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, in the past 10 years alone, whooping children has resulted in nearly 280,000 reports of physical abuse against black children, with more than 758,000 of our young entering foster care because of physical and other types of abuse and neglect. Even more horrifying is that during that same time period, 3,839 Black children died as a result of maltreatment, with about 40% being victims of physical abuse. That's an average of about 380 fatalities per year. It's true that children of other races also lose their lives as a result of abuse, but the rate of fatalities is consistently 3 times higher for Blacks. When we look at these awful statistics, a disturbing truth emerges. In addition to the threats from the trigger-happy police and gun-toting men standing their ground, the safety of Black children is under peril from a culture of whoopings. This is a public health crisis. And yet, many Black folks continue to loudly and proudly describe the pain of their own childhood whoopings as a sign of strength, our source of humor, and essential to shaping them into the successful people they are today. On top of our cultural attachment to hitting our children, America's complicated history has conditioned us to accept that pain is a necessary part of learning and growing up Black. Too many people across the color line believe that Black children are inherently problematic and disrespectful, thugs, the root of society's problems, and are in need of punitive forms of control. Truth be told, if whooping Black children were a prerequisite for white recognition of our humanity and civil rights, and for good Black citizenship and success, then Black Americans ought to be ruling this country right now. Parenting based on beatings has not led our people to the promised land. But we continue with the status quo. As we wage war on the bodies of our children and their emotional well-being, all the measures of health, wealth, educational achievement, and general progress tell a much starker story. The truth is that racist America is determined to keep Black communities under siege by locking up and even killing our future leaders. To keep on living King's dream and embrace some after-school special idea of colorblindness, far too many Black Americans co-sign the dehumanization of our children. We do this every time we hit them. The entrenched belief in whooping children is driven by Black parents' very real fears about the safety and well-being of their children in contemporary America. A Pew Research Center survey published in December 2015, found that Black parents worried more than white parents that their children might get shot at some point, either on the streets of unsafe neighborhoods or by the police. The concern is justified, of course. The most troubling example of this happened in 2014 when a Cleveland police officer mistook 12-year-old Tamir Rice for a 20-year-old man and instantly shot him dead when he and his partner saw Tamir playing in a park with a toy gun. No wonder the talk is as much part of child rearing as the birds and the bees, conversation, and teaching kids to drive. It instills reminders of how to act around white people and how to stay alive if approached by a cop. Do not ever run. They will shoot you. Say yes, sir, no, sir. Do not mouth off. When asked to retrieve anything, move your hands slowly and narrate your movements. If told to get out of the car again, move slowly. You and your vehicle may be searched with no explanation. Do not protest. If police backup arrives, definitely do not protest. Be prepared to turn your pockets inside out and lie down on the ground. You may be handcuffed. Accept any injustice that arises. You can file a complaint later. The goal of these lessons is to keep our young people alive. Black parents would rather pick their child up from the police station than the morgue. The debates about physical discipline that we witnessed during the Peterson controversy are not new. But the spate of killing of young unarmed black people, John Crawford, Rekia Boyd, Mike Brown, Jordan Davis, Chantel Davis, Freddie Gray, Darnisha Harris, Kendra James, Trayvon Martin, Renisha McBride, Von Derek Myers, Tamir Rice, Cameron Tillman, Laquan McDonald, and others who will be killed has elevated black people's questions about how to protect our children to a new level. The connective tissue between the Peterson case whippings, the talk, and the epidemic of police shootings was on full display in Baltimore, April 2015. Toya Graham, the infamous Baltimore mom, snatched her son out of a riot that erupted after the death of 25-year-old Freddie Gray, who suffered a severe spinal cord while in police custody. Hours after Gray was laid to rest, Graham, a single mother of 6, arrived at the Mondawmin Mall and saw her 16-year-old son, Michael Singleton, dressed in black clothes and a mask, poised to throw rocks at police officers in an angry protest. After a rumor spread on social media of a purge, dozens of police in full riot gear and a heavily armored Bearcat tactical vehicle greeted students as they left Frederick Douglass High School and headed toward the mall. Officers prevented the students from boarding the school buses and the local subway, leaving them with no way to get home. According to eyewitnesses, the police escalated the situation by marching aggressively toward groups of stranded, angry students. Students threw bricks and water bottles at police. Police officers maced students and hurled rocks and bricks back at the children. A Baltimore teacher told Gawker, "Those kids were set up. They were treated like criminals before the first brick was thrown. These kids are just angry. These are the same kids that the cops pull up on the corner for no reason." By the time Graham appeared on the scene, cameras were rolling, but she didn't care. Her goal was to get her son out of the chaos and back home safely. When she made eye contact with him, she went ballistic. "Get the fuck over here!" Graham screamed as she repeatedly hit Singleton upside his head. Once unmasked, young Michael backed away from his mother, subdued with a look of humiliation in his eyes. The 50-second video of the incident was viewed millions of times. The mother and son suddenly became media darlings, appearing on CNN, The View, and The Today Show. As Graham paraded her son on the media circuit, it was akin to giving a child a whipping and making him come out to say hello to company. And America ate it up. Oprah Winfrey gave Graham a thumbs-up seal of approval to drive home the narrative that good mothering requires physical force. The New York Post encouraged more black mothers to beat the protest out of their kids with the headline, "Forget the National Guard, send in the moms." MSNBC's Joe Scarborough, who called Ferguson teen Mike Brown Jr. a thug and blamed him for his own death, jubilantly called Graham a good, strong mother. Reverend Al Sharpton co-signed by saying Graham should be praised for her actions. Former NAACP President Kwesi Mufeme called the slapfest necessary violence. During an interview on CNN, he dismissed critics who noted the contradiction of a mother using violence to show her son that violence is wrong. "Yeah, she hit him. She was trying to make him understand that she loves him," Mufeme said. Even the White House weighed in, seemingly giving her parenting choices presidential approval. Press Secretary Josh Earnest channeled in his inner Mr. Rogers, calling Graham's actions a powerful expression of love. That same kind of passion and concern and love for the well-being of one's child is the kind of thing that can contribute to a young man or woman having the type of opportunity to succeed that a lot of other kids don't get, he said during a televised press conference. The Obama administration's endorsement isn't surprising, given that this same president had previously articulated his support for whipping children. In 2013, Obama delivered a tough love speech at the NAACP's 100th anniversary gathering, where he, yet again, lectured Black folks on the importance of good parenting. He advised that, in addition to spending quality time with children, making them put away the Xbox, showing up for parent-teacher meetings, helping them with homework, and getting kids to bed at a decent hour. Quote, we need to go back to the time when parents saw some kid fooling around. It wasn't your child, but they whoop you anyway. Or they'd tell your parents and then they'd. The president's comments before the NAACP audience, the epitome of old school Negroness, were met with huge applause and laughter. But the fact is, our biracial president grew up around Asians and white people and was not shaped by Black adults during his childhood. One has to wonder if his white mother and white grandparents embraced such parenting choices. And surely, we cannot assume that they called it whooping unless Southern Black vernacular has taken root in Hawaii. Instead, Obama, who has admitted that he had to teach himself how to be a Black man in America, has learned to reinforce his credibility within the Black community by reminiscing nostalgically about corporal punishment. It was his way of saying, I'm Black, I'm one of you. Given the power of his perch, his past experience as a community organizer in the violent city of Chicago, and the fact that his words carry a lot of weight, it was irresponsible for Obama to promote whipping children. Not to mention, it's not a practice in his home. In an interview, the First Lady Michelle Obama said that she tried spanking her daughter Malia once or twice and found it unproductive. I did it 1 or 2 times and just found it to be completely ineffective because it was less about teaching a lesson and more about my own feelings. It's clear that from Oprah to Obama, Charles Barkley to Al Sharpton, and Joe Scarborough to racist police, everyone appears to be in agreement that the bodies of Black children need to be whooped, especially those like Toya Graham's son, who was railing against his own oppression. At the height of the Baltimore mom controversy, I appeared on CNN's segment with Illinois Congressman Bobby Rush, a former Black Panther who took to the House floor with a large photo of Graham hitting her son and made a special appeal to African American mothers. He described this picture as an image of a strong Black mother giving her son a love whooping to snatch him back from the senseless violence that currently plagues the city of Baltimore, Rush added. As this picture demonstrates, mothers can and mothers must be the mobilizing force to take back our streets. He then asked mothers across the country to show solidarity with Graham by wearing yellow. Since slavery, Black women have taken their racial duty to keep Black men alive very seriously. When the choice is survival versus revolt, we mostly choose whatever action will keep our children and husbands and brothers alive. And so it is with Graham. The public's view is that she saved her son's life that day. I, however, was adamant that her tough love approach and literal preemptive strikes against Michael do nothing to break the cycles of violence in our homes and in our communities. The widespread celebration, in fact, had little to do with what was good for Graham, her son, and the Black community as a whole. The reason she was being worshipped by the news media was not because of a genuine understanding of her fear and motivation for hitting her son, but because she symbolized the tradition of keeping Black male bodies in check. Never mind that her violence against her son may only incite anger and frustration because it prevented him from resisting the system of oppression in his community. 6 months after she made headlines, CBS News caught up with Graham and found her not living the life of a hero. She and her children were in danger of losing their home. They were struggling to put food on the table, and the mother and son still lived in fear of the violence ravaging their neighborhood. Before Freddie Gray's death, between January and April 2015, Baltimore had seen more than 100 shootings and 40 homicides, earning the city the nickname Bodymore, Murderland. While law enforcement, Black political figures, the media, the racist trolls online were busy portraying the young people who took to the streets of Baltimore to fight for their rights as hooligans, I cheered for them. They were doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing, embracing a long-standing American tradition of resistance, all in the name of democracy and freedom. They did what generations of young people from Soweto and Palestine have done, to fight for their own lives when their country devalues and demonizes them, when no one else will stand in solidarity with them. The media complained that the vandalism, arson, and looting were just opportunistic violence, and those young people had no real political agenda, as if Black people living in poverty don't have the ability to be organized and intentional. Lawlessness and thugs threaten the peace, the pundits argued. Never mind that peace was defined by the killing of unarmed Black youth, systemic harassment by the criminal justice system, mass poverty, unemployment, divestment in schools, poor housing, and inadequate health care. But I saw young people living out Dr. Martin Luther King's words, spoken 3 years after his famous I Have a Dream speech. The riot is the language of the unheard. I have great compassion for parents like Toya Graham, who are doing the best they can to raise up children under enormous stress while barely scraping by. This is a mom who was so afraid for her son's life that she admitted trying to shield him from the police and Baltimore's dangerous streets by keeping him in the house. Ultimately, parents like her just want their children to live, even if that means enacting violence against their bodies and spirits to keep them in their place. I have compassion because she is parenting in an environment where the powers that be make sure that the average Black parents, especially single moms, are embedded in circumstances where their needs for their bare essentials of life for themselves and their children remain unmet. Racist aggression, disenfranchisement, discrimination, incarceration, and generational theft of Black wealth have ensured that most Black folks are constantly in survival mode. Moreover, whooping our kids creates a false sense of protection that actually plays on white racist narratives that locate anti-Blackness at the feet of Black children's bodies and behavior. In other words, we believe that stop and frisks, school suspensions and expulsions, mass incarceration, and death by police are rooted in the Black child's body that needs more whoopings. What's so disturbing is that racism is let off the hook. A militarized police force is not the problem. Systemic racism, from the war on drugs to racial profiling, from hyper-segregation to community divestment, is not the issue. The message is simple, but extremely dangerous. More than rampant poverty, more than overzealous police, more than entrenched racism, the behavior of Black children becomes the true enemy of peace. The distracting conversation turns the spotlight back on the Black youth and the shared belief across racial lines that the only way to keep Black children safe from racism and out of trouble is to hurt their bodies. Given the celebration of Graham, it's no surprise that countless Black parents are now using their cell phones to broadcast their tough love parenting all over social media. At one level, these public displays of humiliation reflect Black parents' sense of insecurity and inadequacy in rearing their children, as they seek applause for projecting strong values and a no-nonsense approach. These public displays of extreme discipline are an overcorrection and a declaration to the world, look what we're doing. We're parenting. We don't let our kids run wild. We're demanding discipline. So, hey, America, shut the hell up. At another level, the public whoopings reveal how there's nothing easy about parenting a Black child today. Adults keep arguing in circles about the appropriate ways to discipline children's bodies into safety and achieve the peace that we've been longing for in our communities. Meanwhile, Black children all over this country continue bearing the brunt of racist devaluation on top of the pain of being hit by their loved ones. Irrespective of the reasons, rage induced by racism or a yearning to protect and ward off death, the hitting still hurts. But let's be clear. Contrary to popular belief and decades of surveys, studies, and racial stereotypes, whooping children didn't begin as a black thing. It's not even native to us. There's no evidence that our ancestors in West Africa embraced this kind of child rearing. It was introduced with the arrival of Europeans on the African continent centuries ago. We've just kept the tradition going.